Can y'all hear me in the chat? Alex, Nicholas, all you guys. Want to make sure my audio works for y'all. All right, cool. Looks like we're coming in loud and clear. Welcome everybody to the YouTube stream, all 9 of you. Hopefully we get more people in here. I just put out a couple more posts, and a couple of the sponsors are gonna shout out some stuff. So yeah. So if you haven't guessed already, haven't seen the posts, this is Casey Wilkerson. Casey, why don't you introduce yourself and explain what you do?
Oh my goodness. So, Casey Wilkerson, my current title is Principal Lighting Designer for Disney Parks Live Entertainment Anaheim. So, we have a group in Anaheim and we have a group in Florida, and they are structurally identical. So, we have principals in each of the disciplines. So, you've got lighting, audio, video, show control, and technical direction. And we form the technical design group. We take care on the West Coast, we take care of both parks in Anaheim. We also take care of our resort on Oahu. And we also provide design and programming support for some of the Asian parks. And our group over in Florida does the same thing. They take care of all of the Florida parks, but then they also support Disney Cruise Lines, and they take the other portion of the Asia parks. Paris sort of sits by itself and has its own small production group there. So my responsibilities, ultimately my deliverable is that a design, implement, and program all of the entertainment show lighting that we do for the properties that we're responsible for. So it doesn't mean I do it all on my own. That's way too much work for one person. So we have 3 designers currently that work on my staff, and we have essentially assignments, and they are sort of split between new projects, ongoing what we call annual projects, things like Grad Night or Oogie Boogie Bash, things like that. And then there are special events that occur throughout the year, something like the Star Wars Galaxy's Edge grand opening, or I don't know, some private party like the Disney After Dark events that we've been doing. So we split the workload and try to manage the capacity amongst the 4 of us.
Crazy. That's quite the
It is
quick
it is
setup.
a little crazy, actually.
So right now I imagine it's pretty dead stop and everyone's like trying to find some kind of
It's
new things to do at home.
Yeah, it's super weird at the moment, and I think it's probably going to get a little weirder.
Right.
And really, the only thing I can say about it is that we are already making plans for when we reopen, what we're going to do.
That's great.
We're continuing to work things we're continuing to work on things in the background, because we realize that the audience is still there,
Hmm.
and the audience and the demand is just sort of building
Right.
up. And so I think once we reopen the gates, it's the hope is, at least from my perspective, that it's going to be a
Yeah.
madhouse, and we're going to see tons of people, and it's going to be awesome to get back to doing what all of us probably on this chat love doing,
Right.
which is creating for our audience.
That's right. So I kind of want you to dig into how you got started in your career, because a lot of people are just either starting out or maybe they're still trying to figure out, where can I go to be a designer or learn this craft, or some of them might already know it. So maybe they just want to hear a different point of view, someone else's experience. So why don't you explain how you got into this career?
Got it. So the path has not been like, perfectly straight down the
Right.
road. It's been sort of like full of all sorts of curlicues. So when I was in school, at a very young age, I was taking art classes, and in my very first career that I can remember wanting to engage in was being an artist. I wanted to paint and sculpt and all of that. And after a while, I thought, okay, well, maybe that's not it. Maybe I want to be a musician. And so my parents gave me an electric guitar for Christmas one year, and I like practiced and practiced and practiced. And after like a year of learning, I got to be really, really atrocious at playing the electric guitar. And because I just didn't have that
Right.
discipline for it, right? But at the same time, I still continued being interested in art, and so I started looking at graphic art and drafting. And it was through a drafting class that I took in junior high that I thought, okay, well, maybe it's architecture. Maybe I want to be an architect because I love drafting. I like architecture in general. I think is really inspiring. And so I was like, okay, that's it. I've made my decision. I'm going to be an architect. And I got into high school and started taking math classes because you have to take advanced math to be an architect.
Right.
That did not work. Like at all. Uh, so I thought, okay, being an architect is going to remain an unrealized career option because I just cannot get past a certain point. And it didn't, and honestly, I just didn't want to dive that deeply and overcome my hatred of
Right.
math in order to, get to the goal of being an architect. At about the same time, I became involved in theater through a couple of friends of mine. They roped me in to afternoon. One afternoon, they said they were doing what was called a paint party, and they're like, "There'll be pizza, there'll be sodas and music, and it'll be fun, and we'll all paint the set, and we'll have a great time." And I said yes because, well, mainly because they said there would be pizza. And so I showed up, and it was really obvious after about the first 5 minutes that the only reason I was there was because I had an art background and I actually knew how to hold a paintbrush. And so, so I jumped in and started basically, give a 10 minute, this is how you paint. And we started painting, and my friends were right. It was a blast. We had a great time, and there was music and pizza, and I made a lot of new friends. And so I started getting more involved in theater starting in high school. And it was a teacher that sort of knew my background and really helped me see the connection between the fact that had been interested in art and had been interested in architecture. And he said, well, what have you ever considered something like set design? And I was like, well, let's see. I know enough math to keep something for standing, for 2 weekends for a high school theater
Right.
show. So I went down the road of being a set designer, and I loved it. Like I absolutely loved it because I was getting to dabble in and combine a couple of the things that I was really inspired by. And it was I got a scholarship to college, and in between, and I left thinking I'm going to be a set designer. Right? I've graduated high school. I'm going down the road. This is what I'm going to be. And in the summer break between high school and college, I went to see the Police on the Synchronicity tour in 1983, I want to say. And it was the first time I'd ever seen Moving Lights. The Police were the second band ever to use them. They used the VL1s after Genesis had used them on the first tour they were ever used on.
Right.
And we were in like the second or third row, it's super close up, and everybody comes on, the band comes on stage, and all my friends are like, "Oh my God, Sting, he's right there!" And I'm looking up, right? Like the only thing I can pay attention to is what's going on in the ring. And I was like, I don't know what that is, but that's what I want to do. And I've been going to concerts since I was, probably gosh, my parents actually let me go to concerts starting in like the seventh grade. So I'd seen a lot of shows at that point. I had never seen lights move. And it was bonkers. And so I get to college, I change my major, I'm sitting in my first lighting design class, and the professor goes, "So, anybody have any questions?" And I asked him, I was like, okay, there were like 50 lights, and they moved, and they all changed colors, and the colors were super saturated, and there were patterns. Like you could see, they were projecting in the air on the haze. It was the craziest thing. And he's like, "So, were you altered at this concert in any way?" And I was like, "No, I'm telling you what I saw." And he was like, "Well, I'm not aware of anything like that we use in theater." I'm like, okay, well, maybe theater's not where I belong. So continued my college education. That was in Texas. And after I got done with college, I bounced around the theater scene in Houston for a little while, and then moved out to California. and had a couple of friends of mine that worked at Disneyland, and they were getting ready to hire for a show called Fantasmic, which was
Whoop,
still in
whoop.
the planning stages. Right, a tiny little skit on the water that we call Fantasmic.
Right.
And
I think
so I
everyone
got
in this chat, that show like changed their lives.
it.
That was like our
Uh,
Genesis or
it changed
Police
mine too.
tour, right?
So I interviewed and got the job, and I started out at Disneyland as a technician, and I loved being a tech at Disneyland. And the thing that I loved, there were a couple things that I loved about it. Number one was the access to the technology, right? The toy box that you get to open and play in.
Right.
I loved working with the people, all of my fellow techs in black. And then the other thing was that it was different every day, right? So
Hmm.
you could get scheduled on a show crew, and then you might be on a maintenance crew, then you might be on some sort of overnight thing, and then there's um, a film shoot going on that broadcast services is doing that they need people for.
Right.
And so I had worked there for probably about 3 or 4 years, and I realized that I wasn't bored. And what
Sure.
had started as, okay, fine, I'll go do a summer job and work on the river for 3 months and supplement my income, um, uh, all of a sudden had turned into 3 or 4 years later, and I'm like, oh, this is crazy. I really love doing this. And at about that time, I had the opportunity to go out on a couple of promotional tours that we used to do.
Hmm.
This was for the film Pocahontas, and we were working with the group that markets all of the films at the studio, and they wanted to send out a promotional tour, and they needed technicians to do that. So I went out on that tour as a tech, and about halfway through the tour, they decided they wanted to take the tour to Europe for 12 weeks.
Dang.
And no, 6 months, 6 months, 12 cities in 6 months.
Whoa.
And I thought, well, I, 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 I gotta go. I have to go to Europe, right? And because it was a co-production between the American Park and Disneyland Paris, they decided to blend the crew. So it was going to be half American, half French crew. So we had to re-interview for our positions. In that process, I actually got bumped up to the lead. And then about 2 months into the tour, the tech director I was working with got promoted and pulled back to the States to begin working on the next tour. And I moved up into his position as a TD. And over the course of the next few tours, we did a tour for Hunchback, we did a tour for Hercules, and then I came back to the parks and was back in Blacks for a while as a tech, and then had the opportunity to be an assistant tech director for our 45th anniversary fireworks show called Believe There's Magic in the Stars. And
Yes.
that is really, really when everything sort of took a turn. And I joined the staff right after Believe opened as a tech director, because at the time we did not have any design disciplines. We hired outside contractors for most of our design work, or the tech directors worked with hourly technicians and programmers to create everything that guests were seeing.
Right.
And being a tech director was the closest that I could get to being a designer. That's what all my training was, what all my education was in, but that wasn't a job that was available to me at Disney at the time. But I loved working there. And so I thought, okay, well, I can do this. I can do this because I enjoyed being a TD. I liked being involved in all of the crafts, the
Hmm.
way that you get as a TD.
Right.
So I decided that I would stick with that. And after about a year or two, I realized that I could just hire myself as an LD since I was the TD. So that's kind of what I started doing. And that eventually evolved into the position that I have now. When you work for a big company, there are often structural, corporate changes.
Hmm.
So we all had our specialties as tech directors. Mine was lighting and electrics. And in 2012, our structure changed, and they created design roles, and myself and the audio designer, or the audio TD, moved into senior designer roles. And then about 4 years ago, we restructured again, and the principal roles were created and staff positions were added. And so that's when I moved up into the principal role and got to hire my staff. And it's the what I can tell you is that I if I had had a plan, if I had decided very early on in my life that I wanted to be an LD, I don't think it could have worked out any better.
Right.
Because I love what I do. I still get the same. Okay, I've been doing this for a long time, and I still get the same sort of joy when we fire up a rig for the first time, and I see lights move for the first time, and like moving lights are 30 years old
Right.
now, and I still feel like I'm a 17-year-old kid watching the police when we fire up a rig. And so that sort of tells me that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, that I'm doing what I'm meant to do.
That's awesome. Quite the journey.
It has been there's a lot of work.
Right. No, I think that's awesome though. So we're gonna dig now into design.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how the process works for you, um,
Okay.
design-wise for a new show. Um, so yeah, you could use probably a past show as an example. Obviously, we don't want to give away any spoilers
Sure.
for anything coming up. So go ahead.
So it also well okay so it's not just a Disney thing, it's a
Right.
theater thing, and I think it goes out to anyone that works in this craft, and that is ultimately we're all storytellers,
Right.
right? So whether you lighting a play, lighting a musical, lighting a fireworks show, lighting a worship service, lighting a band, it doesn't really matter. There's always a narrative arc, and then there are always chapters or scenes, however you want to think about them within that narrative arc. So if I look at something like, you look at something like one of our fireworks shows versus, say, Mad Tea Party, those offerings are really different. The process was virtually identical. So it really starts with, for me, was sitting down with usually the show director, um, and sometimes the producer and production manager, and us having a conversation about ultimately what story are we telling. So I'll use Villains Grove at Oogie Boogie Bash as an example,
Right. That looked
because that
amazing. I didn't even get
well
to see it in person, but it still looked amazing in everything I've seen.
well, and and the reason I use that as an example is because it is non-linear, non-narrative. There doesn't appear to be a story there at all. It's just cool lights and trees.
Hmm.
And we actually put a lot of thought into what this world was that we were creating. The thing that was important to the show director was, and I think he said this in interviews too, is that we weren't creating something that was intended to be scary and threatening. What we were creating was a world that the villains had realized. And in the eyes of the villains, their world is beautiful. And so that was a sticky, weird thing to deal with, to try to make people understand that you're doing a Halloween offering that's intended to be beautiful, that's intended to take your breath away.
Right.
And that was it was a bit for some people to wrap their heads around, the people that we were trying to sell it to. But we were able to come up with a bunch of concept art and do a couple of demos in advance to really illustrate at one-to-one scale for one or two things what was in our heads. And that, I think, tends to be the hardest thing during the design process. Even though we have all these great previs tools, and we've got a lot of designers that are also artists that can sketch things out, there is still something about lighting that is ephemeral and is hard to describe verbally, to someone who may not have the same vocabulary, right? We're talking about beams and haze and patterns and projection and angles and architecture and all of that. And probably everybody on this chat can understand what we're talking about, but you get outside of that and it's like, okay, what do you mean? What do you mean beam architecture? What is that? So you have to start a little further back when you're explaining things, and trying to get your design across. So we'll start within that small group. And then what I will typically do is I will, and this is something that I do just for myself, and it's anchored in, I think it's a British lighting tradition, which
Hmm.
is I write a creative brief. And essentially it's one or two paragraphs. And what it does is it serves kind of as, you can think of it as a mission statement, you can think of it as a roadmap, and what it helps me do is clarify what I'm thinking about this particular project that we're working on, right? So, for something like I did a museum gig for the Huntington Library a couple years ago in San Marino,
Hmm.
and we were, I mean, it was architectural lighting, and so the design brief for that was very technical and very, so it was about logistics, and it was straightforward. We're illuminating this. This is the color temperature. This is cell phone. With something like Villains Grove, um, it's a lot more flowery. It reads more like a narrative or a story, because what I find helpful about the brief is that it gets all of my thoughts down on paper, which helps me process them. And then once we get actually into the meat of the project, if I get stuck, which happens, I can always go back and refer to it and go, oh yeah, this is what I was thinking. These are the ideas that I had originally. And if I'm trying something that's just for whatever reason not working, we've all sat there with our programmers or at a console or walked around a show site looking at things going, this isn't what I had in my head. This isn't what I pictured. This cue is not working, or this song is not working. It really helps to go back and reference that. I don't think I've ever shared any of the creative briefs with any of my collaborators, because to them, I'm not sure it would mean anything.
Right.
Um, but I find it's really helpful to get all of that down for me on paper. Um, and then we start going through the steps of the process that everybody goes through, right? There's the inevitable. You have to figure out how much money you're going to spend. You have to figure out what technology you want to use, and how that fits in to the larger production as a whole. And we can get into the details of that if you've got additional specific questions. But
Hmm.
but that's how it starts. The process is virtually identical for anything that I'm working on. But it really does start with getting what's in the director's head out of their head. And I'm very lucky and very grateful that I get to work with a bunch of directors who are super collaborative, and and what they're coming to me with is, I know A, B, and C, but I'm relying on you to fill in the rest of the alphabet.
Right.
So it ends up being we're exploring it together, and it's less about, there are some directors out there, and I've worked for them in theater, where sometimes you feel like a waiter, right? So it's like, oh, you want this, and you want that, and you want that, and you want that. Okay, great, I'll get that for you, and I'll be right back. Um, but there are others, the ones that I truly love working with, that are just so open to exploration and collaboration.
That's awesome. Speaking of collaboration, how does collaboration work for you? Is it obviously it seems like it's a pretty big process. Anything you have to say about it for people who feel like maybe they can do it all on their own, or they're not maybe willing to collaborate? Because I've definitely ran into people like that. I'm sure you have, where they're not willing to collaborate, and then the show kind of suffers because of that sometimes. So can you
Yeah.
expand on collaboration and how that works for you guys?
Well, it's sort of, it's kind of collaboration in the extreme in some ways. The for and again, this is just me personally speaking.
Hmm.
I think that, for me, collaboration comes down to a couple of different things. I think it starts, oddly enough, with empathy.
Hmm.
So, being trained as a theatrical designer, my number one job is to render the other designer's work effectively, right?
Right.
So the set has to look like the set, and the costumes have to look like the costumes. And if Belle comes out in her beautiful yellow ball gown and I barf green light all over it, then then I have failed at I have one job, right? And I
Right.
failed it. So where it starts is having some sort of sense of what the set designer and the costume designer, specifically really those two, are going through in their art. Doesn't mean that I have to take on their problems or their issues. It just means that I need to understand what's important to them, because I think our design brothers and sisters have, set designers spend like countless hours thinking about finishes and texture and color, and costume designers like costume selection, fabric selection is a freaking rabbit hole,
Right.
and you spend countless hours going through and trying to figure out just what the perfect shade of this color is. And the perfect shade of that color is the perfect shade of that color because of how the color is applied to the substrate, right? And so it's like, if I don't take into account the underlying color of the substrate, we've all seen the situation where we're wearing, black pants, black shoes, and a black hoodie, but they're all three different shades of black, right? Once you put a single color light on them, they all go into different directions.
Yeah.
So it's being cognizant and aware and having empathy for their art and taking that into account as you're creating yours. Then there's a couple of other things that go with that. There's trust and respect kind of go together and really shouldn't need to be said, but I think kind of do, because we've all run into people in our industry where it's like, how did this bozo get to where he is?
Right.
How is that a producer? So I think you have to have just a basic level of respect for who's standing in front of you, and realize that, in a lot of our situations, especially everyone that does freelance, it's like, okay, well, the person that you're standing in front of that's probably giving you the hardest time is probably also the same person signing the check.
Right.
So be able to deal with that person in a way that you both walk away feeling like you've gotten what you needed to out of the situation, I think it is absolutely possible, and I think is really important.
Right. That's awesome.
And then probably the last thing is diversity. And I know that may sound odd, but I think if you look at what so many theater companies have done, whether it's colorblind casting, if you look at how we've gone into different cultures all over the world, and without appropriating the culture, we've incorporated the culture into what we do.
Right.
I think that that is tremendous for an audience, no matter who the audience is. But I also think that the production teams grow in strength. The more voices you have and the more perspectives you can take into account, I think you ultimately come up with with a product that, on the flip side of that, more people end up enjoying. People see themselves in that, or they see ideals or values that represent their way of thinking. And so I think that is really important to have all of those voices at the table. Right. From a practical perspective, real collaboration is hard. It's even harder these days since we're all doing it via VTC, because it requires that you shut up and listen, and consider for 1 second that you might be wrong, and that's, to me, that's a huge part of it. It's like, I've been doing this for a really long time, but I don't go into a meeting or a work session or a creative session thinking that I have all the ideas and my ideas are going to win. That's not how you collaborate. Collaboration is circular, and it's iterative, and it's messy, and it gets out of hand, and it requires a good, strong producer often to keep it guided. Somebody has to put guardrails on it, whoever it is in your individual organization. But I think it has to take into account all of the voices in the room, and treating those voices equally. Now, the flip side of that is that it doesn't mean that everyone's opinion should be weighted equally, right? So it's like, there are a lot of times that I'm not really interested in hearing what the rigger has to say about my rig.
Right.
because it's like if I'm going to hand you a set of drawings, and I'm not really terribly concerned sometimes if that's going to be a difficult position to get to, because that's the position that I need. And so there are some times that you have to draw the line and end the collaboration.
Right.
um, but I find even those situations are easier to navigate if there are one or two things that you can give on, and that you can allow someone to leave the situation or the conversation feeling like they've gotten a little bit and that they've been heard as well. And that's, I think, at the end of the day with collaboration, that's ultimately what most people are looking to do, is just know that their concerns have been listened to, they've had a chance to air them without any judgment, and then they can go on with whatever it is they're working on.
Right. That's awesome. All right.
Looking at
We are lighting people, and a lot of people in this are lighting people. So,
Yes.
fixture selection. How does that process work for you on a design?
Okay. It's the very last thing I do.
Cool.
It is because it's like the art comes 1st,
Mm-hmm.
and so I have to figure all of that out, and then I have to figure out what we're going to do to implement the art, and that comes down to fixture selection, right? And I am very I know this is going to sound weird, knowing that we have access to a lot of high-end technology, but I'm not a huge proponent of the latest and the greatest just because it's the latest and the greatest. I tend to be more concerned with what's the right tool to achieve this particular effect. And if there's a low-tech, interesting way to do it, then I'm sometimes more engaged in that solution than in finding like the latest whiz bang thing to use.
Right.
So now that said, there you do get into some situations where there are very specific parameters. Let's say if you look at something like the relight of Phantasmic that we did in 2017, and you're looking for a moving head that can push Congo 400 feet away.
Oh yeah.
So that's in 2017 at least, or 2016 when we were doing the demos. That's a short list.
Right.
And luckily that list has grown longer. But so you start with bringing in demos, and luckily we work with so many. I think all of us really have access to so many great gear options and gear manufacturers that are willing to just, sure, we'll bring out some 5 different lights for you to look at, or
Right.
we'll send them to you, or you can come to the shop and we can bang through them or whatever. And I think that I think that's a really important part of the process is really examining what is out there. One of the things that we tend to get sort of caught up in is like when the Sharpie came out, right? So Sharpie was cool, like coolest thing we'd seen in a long time. But the Sharpie did one thing. It
Right.
did it super well, but it did one thing. And so then the question became after that, it's like, okay, is there a fixture out there that can do that plus?
Mm-hmm.
And then we started going into hybrid fixtures and everything sort of, well, it converged and then it diverged again, and now it's converged again. As far as feature set in fixtures and everything, then they got smaller, then they got larger. So I think the important part of the process is to be really clear about what you're looking for, and what is the right level of technology. The Villains Grove walkthrough that we did is amazingly low tech for what it is, for what it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
It does not look like a low tech show.
Right.
And on the back end, on the control side, don't get me wrong, it is not low tech. But as far as the fixture selection was concerned,
Right.
it was we had 2 nights of demos. We brought in probably more gear than I've ever brought in for a demo, ever. And we set up a couple of different show scenes. We looked at things. We did A B all night long for 2 solid nights. And finally, when it came to the end of it, we got to a list of gear that was was appropriate for the project that we were doing. We didn't over design it, and we didn't over specify it. And I think that's something to keep clear in your mind, is what technology is out there, what am I looking for, what solves my problem, right?
Right.
And what's the best solution for my problem? And sometimes the best is a value proposition between what the light can do and how much it costs, and if you're renting, how long you need it for, that sort of thing. So I think there are a number of different ways to attack gear selection, but it really does start with being clear in your mind about really what you're looking for, and secondarily, in this day and age, having an A, a B, and a C option.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've probably all experienced, especially on the purchase side, that lead times for gear has grown tremendously.
Right.
There are some manufacturers that you call and you say, I need 48 of something in 12 weeks, and they laugh because they don't have it, because they do just-in-time inventory and they have to make it.
Right.
And so that's something that I think is really important to have, is okay, if we can't get A, then we need another option, so that the project can continue running.
Awesome. All right. I gotta ask this question. Do you find yourself going back to the same fixture for a lot of applications?
Um, for a lot of applications, I would say, not generally.
Okay.
But I also realize I'm in sort of an odd position,
Mm-hmm.
because our rigs are like, if you look at the fireworks rig, we put that in for Disneyland Forever, and we installed it in late 2014, and so it's been the same rig since then.
Right.
The fan rig has been the same since 2017.
Mm-hmm.
Magical Map's been the same rig since 2013. But as I'm saying this, I realize we've updated technology in all of those shows, right?
Right.
So I guess the answer is no. Truly, we don't keep going back to the same fixtures.
Right.
We,
That's good.
yeah, but there's always something new. There's always something different, and there's always like a new feature that you're looking for, or there's a gotta have feature for a
Right.
specific show. There's like, oh my gosh, I need this animation wheel, and
Right.
so this is the only fixture that has an animation wheel that does this. So
Right.
you're sort of locked into that.
That's great. All right. What was the most challenging design you've worked on? What was a challenge, and what did you do to overcome that challenge?
Okay, so, oh gosh, and I got a couple of interesting questions in chat too. We'll get to those.
Oh boy.
Okay, so, okay, it's not the big projects that are, well, okay, so let me say it this way. The big projects are very challenging, but the big projects usually have a giant team of really incredibly well qualified people working on them.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a bunch of people that can jump in and help problem solve
Right.
and deal with the issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the smaller projects that tend to be really challenging. I think probably the most challenging one within the last couple of years was Villains Grove. And I know that there are a lot of people that would look at that and go, that's not a small project. But in the grand scheme of things, as to what we would normally do, it is in some ways. The gear selection was the quantity of gear was high. The different number of different types of fixtures was less than a half dozen. And so there was a simplicity, but then there was also this great complexity because of the control and the placement.
Right.
But I think the challenges that I've had have been all about the logistics and the timeline and the budget.
Right.
Those probably sound familiar
Oh
to
yeah.
everyone who's watching this, right?
Budgets, budgets, budgets.
Because there's not contrary to popular belief, there's not a giant pile of money sitting around anywhere
Right.
that some producer just wants to throw more at you, right?
Right.
Um, so I think the I think Village Grove was probably the most challenging, and the reason why ultimately is because the creative was a moving target. We were still in the creative process while it was beginning, while we were specifying gear, while the content was being created, and while we were even loading it in. Because it was the first time we'd ever really embraced doing anything like this. It was, even though that sort of format wasn't new, it was new to us. And so there was a significant learning curve. And anytime you do something for the first time, it's always going to be more difficult.
Right.
The remount this year is just like everybody's like, whatever, we got it.
Right.
But the first time was really, 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 really hard. And it really came down to those three things. It was the timeline, it was the budget, and it was the fact that we were still creating as we went along. And you had a second part of your project. How did you overcome those? Okay, our second part of
Right.
your question. So we on that project, honestly, we just bulldozed right over them.
Dang.
Because there's a great story that Lorne Michaels, producer of Saturday Night Live, told. I think in an interview I read with him in Rolling Stone one time, and it was, "We don't go on the air at 11:30 on Saturday night because we're ready. We go on because it's 11:30 on Saturday night."
Right.
Right? So at some point, the timeline just becomes what it is, and you do what you can get done in the time that you have. And I think all of us want to get our shows to the point where they're perfect on opening night. And we all know that's not true.
Right.
Every single one of us wants to add 10 more cues, 12 more cues,
Right.
or I can fix this and touch that and tweak this. And I think, oh my gosh, I did a lighting masterclass with, I want to say it was Jennifer Tipton in New York one year. And she referenced a Picasso saying, and he was like, "You never finish a painting, you just stop." And she's like, "And I feel the same way about lighting a show."
Right.
At some point, they come and take away the tech table.
It's true.
So I have to stop, and I have to get to the point where I'm happy with that. So with Villains Grove, we just tried to remain cognizant of the schedule, and we tried to make good choices as far as eliminating things and letting go of things that weren't core to the show. And it was a really good example of being able to go back to the creative brief and go, "Okay, I know what this scene is about. If I lost this, and this, then I still have a show because I know what this scene is about."
Right.
And so that project was a really good example of all of us collaborating together, and every single discipline overcoming a lot of challenges by, first of all, relying on each other, and by all of us understanding that we were all carrying the weight equally. It was billed as a lighting overlay. It wasn't a lighting overlay. It was lighting. It was projection. There was scenic. There were lasers. There was fog. There was music. It was something that everyone had to come to the table with. Okay, I can give up this, and maybe we can do this. And if we slid this way a little bit in the schedule, we could make this work. It was everybody really being solution oriented, which I was incredibly grateful for by the time we got to the end.
That's awesome. Now the fun part for all the lighting programmers out there. How does the programming process work for you with a programmer? Because at Disney, a lot of times, obviously, the designer's not programming it. You've got a
Correct.
programmer
That's
working with you. How does that process work and the
yep.
collaboration between your programmers?
Okay, so this is hands down my favorite part of the process. Sitting down to write cues is
Mm-hmm.
where it's like spending all the time in meetings, spending all the time doing the gear selection, all the time doing the demos, all the time doing the walkthroughs, all of that sort of stuff. It's a great part of the job, and I think you have to love bits of that part of the process so that it doesn't become drudgery. But when you sit down to write cues, is first of all when you find out if your ideas are worth anything,
Right.
which is scary, right? So think about this, right? So the set designer has the luxury of, if you're a set designer like on Broadway and you're building a set, that's built in a scene design shop
Mm-hmm.
somewhere offsite. It's not in the theater.
Right.
So the set designer gets to make their mistakes elsewhere. The
Right.
costume designer can go through the shop as they're sewing things and they mess something up and they can go back and fix it. They get to make their mistakes in private.
Right.
as lighting designers and as video designers, we get to make our mistakes once the cast and the crew and the production team and everyone is sitting there waiting for us to create something amazing, and the pressure is on,
Oh
right?
yeah.
So we get to make our mistakes in public. So that's awesome.
Yeah. High stress
um,
situations.
it can be a high stress situation. And honestly, it's one of the reasons that when I first started transitioning into this role, that I felt very strongly that this should be a collaborative process between a designer and a programmer. And
Hmm.
that's, it's an old school theater way of thinking, but it is also rooted in one of the core expectations of a
Hmm.
designer in our world is that 50% of my job is diplomacy and politics. And there are some times that I need to engage in that, and I can't stop programming a show to deal with that.
Right.
So I need a second set of eyes. I need a super smart brain, hopefully a brain that's way the heck smarter than I am, and someone who has a creative eye as well. Because remember, programming used to be, an old codger LD sitting there going, I want channels 1 and 2 at
Right.
50, channels 3. It was data entry,
Yeah.
right? And it's not that anymore. Anybody who has touched any console in the last 15 to 20
Hmm.
years knows that it's not about data entry.
Right.
And so I want my designers to have their eyes on the stage. I want them to have their head in a creative space. And I want them to be able to verbalize what they need, whether it's channel 1 and 2 at 50, or I need something. Okay, there's like 8 counts, and it's blue, and we need to transition to magenta, but there needs to be some sort of movement up through it, and hear the hi-hat, hear what that's doing. So there needs to be something that goes along with the hi-hat as
Hmm.
well, right? So, and that's more often than not, that last bit was actually how I tend to work.
Hmm.
It's more about sort of painting the picture as opposed to this is what I want.
Right.
And that is rooted in the fact that I have a brilliant group of
Hmm.
programmers that can program in something and go, what about this? What about this? What about this? And so sometimes it feels like shopping,
Right.
like shopping for cues. Um, but most of the time, it's I know what the show needs to be,
Right.
and the programmer is closer to the technology and bringing that onto the
Right.
stage. And it's really the conversation that happens between
Hmm.
us that allows that to be fully realized. As far as I'm concerned, the programmer is my primary collaborator, and I am brilliantly blessed with some of the very, very, very best ones.
That's right. That's incredible. All right. So obviously there's some programs out there who are asking, hey, how do I get a job at Disneyland? We just actually had a question, how to become a Disneyland LD. What advice do you have for any
Yes.
programmers out there who want to work someday on shows like the ones you've designed?
Um, okay, so know your stuff and know it on more than one platform,
Right.
right? So I think it's great for everybody to have like their wheelhouse. For some people that's MAW, for some it's EOS, for some it's Hog, for some it's Obsidian. Doesn't really matter. Doesn't really. They're just
Hmm.
tools. We're console agnostic, how I like to refer to it at the
Right.
park. In that, and again, it goes back to the idea that you're just using the right tool for the job,
Right.
right? So for on shows where we need big, weird control stuff, we will use one platform. On others that are more straightforward, more theater-like, we'll use a different platform. We keep the selection fairly narrow
Hmm.
because we do want to make sure that people get opportunities to work on them. And if we had 10 different control platforms, then that would not work. And we would have a lot of splintering amongst the programmers, and our depth in them would not be as
Right.
great. Um, so I would say specialize in one platform, and but know others as well, maybe less deep.
Right.
Know what happens to the data after it leaves your desk. I have seen way too many programmers go, well, I'm sending DMX. Um, and yes, that is true. But sometimes in some high sort of either high stress or high profile or tight timeline situations, everyone needs to be a participant in the troubleshooting process if things go south.
Right.
And if your knowledge of your rig as a programmer is limited to, well, my desk is great
Mm-hmm.
and I know it's working and I'm sending stuff, then that's not tremendously helpful,
Right.
right? Knowing fixtures, knowing the DMX path, knowing where power is, knowing how everything is powered. I'm not saying you have to do it and lay it out. That's typically a master electrician's job. But our programmers are typically involved with that part of the process, less so on power, but definitely more so on data, where they're involved in laying out the data stream, so that they know where switches are and they know where path port nodes are, and they know where and how we're transitioning to DMX.
Right.
So having all of that knowledge, having some networking knowledge, and a base understanding of IT, I think these days
Oh, yeah.
is critical.
Yeah.
Um,
Everything's IP now.
Right. And then the other part is, how much do you want to? I mean, do you want to be a programmer? Do you want to be a programmer designer? Do you kind of have in mind where you'd like to go?
Right.
There are a number of programmers that I have that are friends of mine that never want to design a show in their entire life, and that's awesome. It's like they're dedicated to the art of programming. And so I think knowing why you're doing what you're doing and while you're doing it is important, and where you would like it to go after that. I think having the ability to adapt to different LD types. Lot of easygoing LDs out there, and a lot who are, let's say, not.
Oh yeah.
And they run the gamut, right? They're from super demanding to, I don't know, I feel like this needs 4Qs. Show me something. And knowing how to assess that, especially if you're walking into a new situation, right? Knowing how to assess that personality type that you're meeting for the first time, and assess that quickly, and figure out how you can best work within that framework, I think is really important. And it's something we don't talk about a lot. The sort of I don't want to say political side, but there's a lot of personal dynamics in our industry, and there are a lot of really big, really strong personalities. And knowing how to navigate those and to spot them and how to deal with them, I think is really important. And then finally, I would say the job of a programmer, as far as learning is concerned, never stops. When we were trying to figure out how we were going to track the watercraft in Fantasmic, and Blacktracks was an option that was not available to us, I sat down with the programmer that programmed the show, and we brainstormed a few different ideas. And because we were working overnight on programming a different show, and we started talking about it as we were programming the show in front of us. And the next night we came back, we didn't talk about it. And the next night didn't talk about it. And then the third night he came back, he was like, all right, I think I have it figured out. Like, what do you have figured out? He's like, I think I haven't figured out how we're going to do it. And so he laid it all out for me, and I was like, okay. And it was like improv. We just kept yes-anding each other, right? It's like, yes, and we could do this, and we could do this. So we'd over-designed the heck out of it by the time we got to the final idea, of course. But we got to the point where between the two of us, between just sort of planting the seed of this is what we need, and him going away and really looking at the technology, and then the two of us coming back together and really talking through beat by beat and sort of technology by technology, because it's 4 different technologies that are working together, how it was all going to work, how the handoffs were going to work, how we were going to really accomplish this. That's something that is invaluable as far as a primary collaborator is concerned. The ability to just sort of take an idea and run with it. And that didn't have anything to do, I mean, he was looking at everything through a programming lens, but he wasn't thinking like a conventional programmer. He was thinking of the bigger picture and trying to solve a problem from his perspective.
That's awesome. And it works great. Tracking that Columbia
It
is
does.
insane. How nothing's
And I will
like
tell
jumping and stuff like it normally would on like Frozen or something. It's
it.
uh it's crazy.
I will tell you. So the conversation. So he and I had the conversation, and about 4 or 5 months later, we roped in a couple of other collaborators from two other technologies, and all of us sat around at, I think it was Bottle Logic Brewing in Anaheim, over literally a napkin.
That's
And
great.
we sketched out our idea, and they came back to us and they said, yes, we think we can make this work. We
That's
showed up
cool.
on site about 6 weeks later, and everything had been installed. They had done a preliminary test,
Mhm.
and but essentially we plugged it in and it worked the first time,
Dang.
which is pretty astounding for a new technology. And it takes a lot of tweaking. It took a lot of time. There's way more involved than it looks like,
Right.
but I love that it looks simple.
Yeah. Totally. All right. Let's see here. All right. Resources or gear. What resource or gear do you think helps you do your job better?
Okay, let's see. Let's see. Okay, so I can't live without Twisted Wave, which is an audio program
Mhm.
that allows me to see the waveform of a song. And when you're working with us, also has a strip for linear time code.
Oh wow.
And so we get, you take something like Mad Tea Party as an example.
Mhm.
You get a song, left channel you've got audio, right channel you've got time code, and to be able to go through that and set markers for something that is, a song, when you're doing a rock and roll song, and in a space of a 4 minute song, you might have 150 cues. And so to lay all those out in a spreadsheet is really onerous. So just to be able to set markers and to go through and type in and identify and name those markers, just so that what's going on, at the time, VL3Ks to blue,
Right.
Sharpies out, that sort of thing, gives me a really good rough sketch. It would be, I used to live in the PC world, and there was a program called Sony SoundForge, and that's what I learned on.
Mhm.
I transitioned to Mac a decade or so ago. Twisted Wave was out there, and it's almost the exact same program, and so I was already versed in it, and it was really, really, really easy to make that transition. So it's the thing that I use on every show,
Right.
um, even though it's not lighting per se related.
That's awesome.
I use, and then the other thing I think is, I use a light meter and a color meter more than I used to. And that is because so many of our shows are now captured on camera
Right.
and are, posted on YouTube. And that means, we are by no means lighting for camera,
Mhm.
unless it's something like, obviously, a press event.
Right.
Um, but the shows need to look as good as they can on camera. And for a while, I was just recording it on my iPhone and watching it back. And I've started using a color meter and a light meter a little bit more, and I can see that becoming even more prevalent.
Right.
And it's not something that never would have been ever would have been part of my toolkit before.
Right. It's cool. All right. Now we're gonna dig into some questions from the chat, and then I have a few more to
Alrighty.
close it out with. But
Okay.
let's see here. Chad asks, "What would have been your fixture of choice for Phantasmic if it had not been the BMFLs?"
Whew. Well, it could have only been the
Right.
BMFLs at the time. So there were a couple of things that drove that decision, and mostly it was because of the fact that I wanted the new version of Phantasmic to go to a far more saturated place than we were able to go on the earlier show.
Right.
So we were placed. It was the Claypacky Alphas, if I remember correctly, which were on fan, which were a great fixture that we loved.
Hmm.
And but we just needed something that was punchier, and it just needed to deliver deep, intense, saturated colors. And when I knew it was going to be the MFL is when we put two of them out at the front of house position at Tower B. We turned them on, we double stacked the gobos and put the animation wheel in, and we saw very little loss of lumens throwing,
Right.
150, 200 feet to the stage. And so that was tremendous to me. I took a picture and sent it to one of my other programmers and went, this is two fixtures. And with two fixtures, we were lighting up the entire tree line and the cider mill and the edge of the island.
Crazy.
And Adam Kemp from Roby was jumping up and down. He was very happy.
Right.
um, but the other thing that it helped us do is going with a fixture like that actually helped us exercise some fiscal responsibility because we were able to buy fewer fixtures.
Right.
The literally the fixture count in the show now is 50% of what the original show was.
Insane.
There are far fewer fixtures in the show, and I would argue we get far more out of them than the original show did. Whether that's good or not, I realize opinions are split on Fantasmic.
Right.
I get it, but
A little bit.
but it allowed us to be able to do what we did.
That's great.
Okay, so I see chat has another question here that is, how does the addition of fixtures work for shows that are already programmed, like when we added the Scenius, Unicos, and Fantasmic? So Unicos is actually a fun story because we were well down the road of programming Fantasmic. We had not opened yet. And and we were the beneficiary of the fact that everything was coming in a little under budget. And I had wanted 5 fixtures on the porch forever. Like since I took the show over in 2014, I wanted fixtures on the porch because I wanted a low backlight position. And so really, truly, that was the only thing on my wish list. I told the production manager, if it happens that we can do this, this would be great. Because I couldn't fit it into the regular budget of the show. And so I got the call of, hey, we can do this. I brought out the Unico, and the reason that we bought the Unico is because of the animation. It has the most beautiful, jagged, random, organic animation wheel of any fixture out there. It's not waves, it's not dots, and it was exactly what we needed for the Hag backlight, and was exactly what we needed for, there was one other scene that I'm blanking on now. Oh, it was in finale, when Mickey's up on the cider mill, and we're backlighting the fountains and all the pyros. So that's where we really wanted to use those. And so we had actually knew that we wanted porch fixtures, and we decided that we would go ahead and once we got them, that we were able to program them into the show fairly quickly. And that's an easy process. It's just going into the, it's adding the new fixtures into whatever those queues are. And luckily they're not, they're not used in a ton of different queues. They're really used fairly sparingly. So it was a super easy process to just go ahead and add them into the queues. And it's just like anything else. You're just doing updates once they're physically there and set up.
That's awesome. Yeah, that answers Chad's about that, and then I think he asked one, which I think he kind of summed up about. Is there an opportunity to reprogram a show or ride without a refurb happening? Oh, that was someone else.
Oh.
Robert asked that.
Robert, yeah. So yeah, that's one of the things I actually love about how we do things. We're much more, like on Broadway, once a show is open, it's considered locked and or frozen, but that's not a term I like to use. And so we're not like that. We're much more like Cirque du Soleil, where creation is something that continues after the show has
Mm-hmm.
opened. And so we have remount rehearsals occasionally. So you can go in and make updates. Now, the updates are with the participation of the current show director. And they're something that are planned out. It's not like I can go watch Fantasmic on a Thursday night and go, I'm just going to hang out afterwards and change a couple
Right.
cues. It's something that we talk about and discuss. Um, and I really I love that about what we do. There are sometimes, quite frankly, that you look at, like especially with our seasonal stuff. Like I basically get to relight Believe in Holiday Magic every year. Um, because there are some times that we'll get out there for rehearsal and I'll run it and I will sit there and look at the programmer and go, I have no idea what I was thinking in this cue. This looks awful. Why did you let me do this?
Yes.
And so to have the opportunity to go through and change those sorts of things is really great. But it's done with the full participation of everybody involved.
That's awesome. Let's see here. How do you deal with balancing lighting versus all the projection mapping and LED video walls that are in use so much today? I think particularly that would probably apply to like the paint show. Dang it, forgot the name. Magical Map.
Magic Map. Okay, so there's a couple of different ways to deal with that. I mean, from a logistical perspective, you look at it where video, especially from a display screen,
Mm-hmm.
right, at something like Magical Map or Mad
Right.
T or at Frozen Live at the Hyperion, those are super bright walls. They are the loudest voice in the
Right.
room. And so there's a tricky balancing act from an intensity perspective and from a contrast
Mm-hmm.
perspective, because it's really really important that both of those elements inhabit the same world, and that when they take focus, it's intentional. Um, so there are a lot of times that we have fairly detailed discussions about whose moment is this? Especially when you're doing something like a pyro show where you've got moments that clearly I'm just getting the heck out of the way so we can see a beautiful break, right?
Right.
Or we're at a part in the music where that lends itself to something that's more lyrical, and that pretty sweeping beams can do something that pyro might not necessarily be able to do.
Right.
And then we have a moment that is more about story, and we want people to pay attention to what's going on in video. So everybody clears out of the way and lets them have a moment.
Right.
So those moments are really carefully thought out, and they sometimes change
Mm-hmm.
during the process, because you create these shows in your own departments, obviously, but then we all get out there together, and once you see how it all looks together, we end up that process, that multi-week process of all of us being out on site overnight after the park closes, looking at all of the elements, most of the time is all of us pulling things out instead of adding things. Because think about it, we've spent a long time in each of our disciplines, and all of us are trying to bring our A game, right? So I'm hitting all the musical hits, and Pyro's hitting all the musical hits, and Video's doing big things, and we're all trying to like pack the show full of everything, and 10 minutes of everything all the time
Right.
is tiring and boring.
True.
So you have to go in and remind yourself of where the peaks and the valleys are
Mm-hmm.
in the narrative, right? So it really comes down to being able to uh, sort of stride the balance of what projection or video versus what lighting is doing, and
Right.
who has the focus in the moment. Now, that's a little bit easier where we are, because we decided a few years ago, actually with Mad T, that since projectors emit light, that and display surfaces emit light, that the LD has a voice and has a place at the table to talk about video.
Right.
Um, the Depending on the project, sometimes an LD will lead the creative effort for video. They'll oversee the animators and the compositors to help create whatever the video is for the show or special event.
Right.
As our video design group works with video systems,
Mm-hmm.
and then animators provide the content. And we don't have the equivalent of like a video director or a media director.
Mm-hmm.
So often the lighting designer performs that role. That tends to be, if I'm being honest, that's probably 50% of my job at the moment is media and content direction. So it helps when you have input to that. Now I realize there are a lot of situations where video and lighting are two sides of a very different coin that nobody wants to deal with, and the two don't talk sometimes.
Right.
And everybody's trying to pull focus, and that's when you need a good, strong show director or producer or somebody, an adult in the room,
Right.
to put guardrails on it and tell someone to edit and to calm
Right.
the heck down. But I have found that ultimately it comes down to, again, going back to the principles of collaboration, of being able to come together and go, all right, this is really what we're trying to do
Mm-hmm.
overall. And right now, video really needs this moment, or right now, lighting really needs this moment.
Right.
So but it is a tricky balance. That's a great question.
That's awesome. Just to throw in there, how much time goes into transitions from a scene to a scene? Because some of those are insanely elegant and seamless, and I just can't imagine how many times you run that cue over and over and over again.
Okay, so that's a great observation, Chris. So the my contention is that in this day and age, anybody with a decent rig and a console can create a bunch of pretty looks.
Mm-hmm.
The magic is what happens between the looks.
Right.
And it's especially when all of the elements, if you can get lighting and video and atmospherics and lasers, if you can get all of those things working together in concert with the music,
Mm-hmm.
then you get this just beautiful magic that occurs. And sometimes it's big and bombastic
Right.
and over the top, and other times it's just tiny and pretty. One of the shows, oddly enough, that I'm the most proud of is we did a special edition, or what we call the expanded edition, of Disneyland Forever over at Rivers of America. So last year we created all new content for that and used the entire Phantasmic lighting rig and the projection rig to enhance the existing show.
Right.
For a number of reasons, we had to go back and create new content for that. And the compositor and the animator that we were working with were just so meticulously detailed about their timing. And it really helped us get to some clarity in that show. And there are a number of those transitions that are just, it's like layer upon layer upon layer, and then the music things happens, and then a chime thing happens, and
Right.
then a cymbal rush happens, and there's something for each of those.
Right.
It's like the video is taking care of the sparkle stuff, and the fountains are building on the cymbal chime, and it's that those cues they actually don't take a long time to build, they take a long time to finesse.
Right.
Because okay, move it back 2 frames, nope, forward 3 frames,
Right.
nope, okay, move it forward 5 frames, but extend the fade time 10 frames.
Right.
You just have to experiment with it. The only way to get it right is to be on site.
That's
And to go through the steps.
Crazy. All right. This is a good question from Robert. How do you navigate swift changes in direction on a project, or has it ever happened? Which I'm sure it has.
All the time. Happens all the time. It really does. You know what? It's really hard sometimes in the moment, right? You spend a long time thinking about the idea that you want to implement. You pick a rig. You get everybody together to program a moment, and then something changes. The song gets cut. And of course, the only song that gets cut is the thing that you're the most proud of, right? That's always how that works.
True.
And so what I have found is that it helps to not get married to anything until whoever is in charge of the big thumbs up gives the big thumbs up. I'm sort of blessed with the fact that I don't know, I can't necessarily say I thrive on change, but I don't mind it.
Mm-hmm.
It's there's always something different. There's always a different idea, maybe a better implementation of idea, something that I hadn't considered. There are some changes that you look at and mourn a little bit. I think in probably every show that I've worked in, there's either one number or one moment or something that gets cut that you're just like, oh man, that was really nice.
Right.
And there are some times that you can come to the table and go, okay, what I really like about this moment is this is what I was going to do
Mm-hmm.
in that moment. There have been one or two times that we've actually kept that moment because of what we were bringing to the table and how we were able to sort of enhance the story in that
That's
moment.
cool.
But the thing about change that you have to remember is rarely is it personal.
Mm-hmm.
Rarely does it have to do with the job you're doing, and it's typically coming from some place that is you're either looking at for a bigger show or they're trying to solve another problem, right?
Right.
Rarely is it about it's like, oh my gosh, the lighting's crap, so we have to change this. It's really more about what's going on with the larger show.
Right. Awesome. All right. Nicholas asked this question, and I think it's pretty good. How do you deal with nerves or pressure or just burnout? Because I imagine in your situation, there's a lot of stress on your shoulders sometimes, and how do you deal with like making sure you get a break or some time off to recoup?
Yeah. Well, so I this actually came recently, last year, and I was out for medical for a little bit. And what I realized during that was that um, I I'm the only one who puts stress on me.
Mm-hmm.
That there's nobody that I work for. There's no show director. There's no creative director. There's no executive
Right.
that is breathing down my neck saying, you need to do this. You're crap.
Right.
There's none of that. The stress is a physical and mental response to the timeline or the logistics
Mm-hmm.
or something in the process, right? So that actually helped me realize that, okay, well, if it's just me stressing about this, then I can control that.
Right.
I can't control any of the scenarios, any of the situations, but I can control my response to it.
Right.
And I can do what I can to not stress about it. Now, there are moments that it's, absolutely inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
The I don't know how many people saw the grand opening of Galaxy's Edge,
Yes.
but you can rehearse a lot, right?
Right.
And sometimes people don't do their lines right. And so that's something that you can look at and allow yourself to be stressed out over,
Mm-hmm.
but ultimately you've got no control.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, you know what? That happened, and then it looked like it looked.
Yeah.
And even though it wasn't my department, it was nobody's department. There was nothing technically wrong in those
Right.
moments. But I was still super stressed out standing there watching it.
Right.
um, but long term, what you do is you handle it with treating yourself well, taking vacations, unplugging. I am fairly diligent when I'm working. That if I'm not working on an immediate project, that's because I balance probably 6 to 12 projects that are in various stages of production at any given time.
Mm-hmm.
The things like if I'm expect that I'm going to be needed on the phone overnight, I will keep my phone on. Otherwise, I turn it off at 8 o'clock every night. I do what I can. I started meditating about 6 months ago, and it's made a huge difference just in my overall stress level.
That's cool.
I know it sounds like hippy dippy, but it has actually been tremendously helpful.
That's awesome.
And I think the other thing is to realize in the moment that this will end, right?
Mm-hmm.
That moment of stress or that moment of pressure or the 2 minutes before the doors open and everything's not ready. It's like, okay,
Right.
well, the doors are going to open and something's going to happen then. Either the stress is going to go like 100 times higher,
Right.
or it's going to the steam's going to blow off.
Right.
And so knowing that it has an end and knowing that you can control your response to it, I think is pretty powerful.
For sure. Those are great suggestions and ideas. Let's see here. Chad asks, I know you look for the instrument that best fits for whatever show you're doing, but do you have a certain company that you keep going back to? I see a lot of VL and clay packing. We kind of answered that, but
Um,
I think
well,
I honestly see more of a variety now, but I don't know if you
there's
have anything to add to that.
yeah, there's way more variety than we used to have. And I think it goes back to that philosophy of the right tool for the job.
Right.
Super frustrating for our repair shop techs because they have to run a million different
Right.
fixtures. So I feel for them, but you're really picking the right tool for the job.
Right.
I have no I'm gonna figure out a diplomatic way to say this. I don't have it's not that I don't have loyalty to our manufacturers,
Hmm.
but you know what? No one company makes absolutely everything perfectly and awesome,
Right.
right?
And they'll admit
So,
that too, which is nice about some of them. Is
well,
they're like, we know you're not
right.
going to pick our stuff all the time. So.
Yeah. This company has a great wash fixture. This company has a great linear LED fixture. This one has a great, profile. Whatever. So to me, it really comes down to uh, the companies that I think are deserving of
Hmm.
loyalty are the ones that consistently pick up the phone at 3 o'clock in the morning when you have a problem. They are the ones that jump through hoops to get you taken care of if you're having warranty issues or repair
Right.
problems. And they do that for you no matter how big your account is. Um, and I think the other thing is the ones that are just really service oriented, that are just there. It's like how can I help you? And we're
Right.
lucky in that most of the manufacturers are showmen,
Right.
right? You talk to any of the people at Elation or Chevet or Roby or Claypacky, and it's like all of those guys and girls love this
Yeah.
industry. They love what they do,
True.
and they love their gear.
Yeah. That's awesome. Opinion on PRG and synchro fixtures. Synchro fixtures have not been at Disneyland recently. I actually used
What
them
can I
not too long ago,
say?
and I was like, I think I'm the last person to use them. But ever since they were in Phantasmic, I think I was like, I am putting those on a show that I designed, so I could at least say I did it. But when we did it, I was like, ooh, yeah, once is enough.
Yep, true. So the thing, I can't be diplomatic about this one.
Right.
So I'm just going to say that the PRG fixture is actually great.
Yeah.
And we've got a few on World of Color,
Right.
and the synchro fixtures are just it's a fixture that I wish we had a modern equivalent of,
Right.
but it feels like it's of a different era,
Right.
but there's still nothing else that really does what
Oh
it
no.
does.
Yeah.
Um,
It's got the most beautiful big beam.
right? I wish it were. I just wish it were more reliable. But I also realize that that is some of the ways, some of the applications in which it gets
Right.
used, say to water,
Yeah.
where where is probably not the best way to use them.
Yes. Let's see here. Where do you find your inspiration? I like that question.
Okay, so I'm okay from an internal perspective, like a lighting perspective. I have a couple of, I guess you would call them lighting heroes, and that would be Willie Williams, who is U2's long-term production designer.
Hmm.
And what I love about his work is that it's maddeningly simplistic.
Hmm.
For as complex as their shows can be from a technology perspective, especially when it comes to rigging and video, the lighting is pretty straightforward. The opportunity to ask Willie a couple of questions, probably 6 or 7 years ago, at LDI. We found ourselves sat next to each other at dinner one night, which was mind blowing. Um,
That's why I love LDI.
and and I asked him about his cueing style, and he was like, "You know what? Less is more. I like building a look and letting the band live in it.
Right.
He's like sometimes for a whole song.
That's cool.
He's like if you look at one most of the time. He's like there's like four cues in that song,
Yeah.
and like in every tour I've ever done, and it's been variations on those same
Right.
cues because why mess with something that works, and B, let the song carry the
Right.
moment. And what I love about that was that it takes the emphasis off of us.
Hmm.
We want to bring everything we have, right? We
Right.
want to use all the toys. We want to be present and create the moment and be active. And I'm absolutely a proponent for lighting driving narrative when that's appropriate. But then there are other times that it's just like, you know what? That's not about me right
Right.
now. It's about the audience and about this song and about this band, and let's just let that be a moment and not have to add anything to it. So I find his work very inspiring. Leroy Bennett is another LD that I find
Oh yeah.
tremendously inspiring. His work, especially his early work, or not early, but middle-ish 2000s work with Nine Inch
Hmm.
Nails was tremendous and groundbreaking. Um, I like a lot of younger designers, and some of that's because I know them. I like Josh Hutchings, who does Ricky Martin
Hmm.
and Madonna
Oh yeah.
recently, and they've all and then some of them have worked for Disney, not coincidentally. Um, but I outside of lighting, I'm inspired a lot by movies.
That's cool.
Oddly enough, Spielberg is an early inspiration, which probably explains why I have so much backlight in my shows and beams through haze.
Yes.
Um, um, I find a lot of it in. I still have a passion for art, and so I'm a museum hound, and we get probably to half dozen museums a year,
That's cool.
and so I find a lot of inspiration there. And I think probably finally, I think it's
Hmm.
everywhere, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's if you're looking for it, you can find it
Right.
anywhere. Whether that is going to something like what was it called, Enchanted Forest of Light at Descanso Gardens, which is just beautiful,
Oh yeah.
beautiful. There's no story, there's no anything. It's just beautifully
Right.
executed. And that was really inspiring. Oddly enough, not from a lighting perspective. It was inspiring from a look at what people can do
Right.
to think about their business differently.
Hmm. That's cool.
So it's like, so it doesn't have anything to do. I mean, it should have inspired me from a lighting perspective, but I was fascinated by that someone had said, let's use light to drive admission during a time of year when we normally close at 5 o'clock at night.
Right.
And it's like that's super inspiring to me that there are people out there that are looking beyond what they know or the normal
Hmm.
and incorporating that into their business.
That's cool. Yeah, for sure. Let's see here. Matt asked, "What was the best part about working on Galaxy's Edge?" I assume
Um,
he means maybe the opening ceremony, or
yeah,
did you
so
do anything for the actual land?
one of my staff lit there's two entertainment offerings in Galaxy's Edge. I think still, and he lit those. The grand opening was a lot of fun to work on because it was one of those. It was one of those sort of pinch yourself moments. I got called into a project meeting, and all of our projects have code names, and sometimes you don't know what the project is until you walk in and people start talking. And I walked in, and within like the first minute, I'm sure my jaw was on the floor because I was like, okay, okay. Obviously, I knew this was coming because at some point we have to open the land.
Right.
But I was pulled into the process really early, and earlier than typical, and was involved in the initial brainstorming about what everything was going to look like, from not only from a lighting perspective, but deciding on whether or not we should use video, to whether or not we should use lasers.
That's
Um,
cool.
because there are lasers in the grand opening of Galaxy's Edge, and you probably don't see them because we
Dang.
use them in a very different way. Um,
Right.
so the fun part of that was being involved so early, and then getting into the land and talking to some of the creators, and the rehearsal process with the talent that opened the land. You don't often, a lot of times when you work with either executives or celebrities, and this is sort of across the board, no matter what business you're in, you don't often get to have all of them at a rehearsal. And we had
Right.
the benefit of having everyone at a rehearsal, which was
Wow.
hilarious to watch.
That's funny.
um,
Dang.
and to be this far away from was really great.
Right.
And then there's something about a, 2 or 3 minutes after you do what you do, and your phone starts blowing up with pictures that are being beamed all over the world.
Right.
And it's your shot of lighting the Millennium Falcon
Right.
was pretty overwhelming, actually.
That's cool. Yeah, it looked insane. That whole land is just insane. I went on the new ride and I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-boggling, isn't
And yeah,
it?
like I don't know if that's what you meant about the use of lasers, but the use of lasers in that ride is insane.
Oh, that is crazy, right?
Because it's so realistic looking. Um, Chad apparently was an LD at the Florida resort. That's cool. So thanks for tuning in, Chad, and don't worry about the questions. We love getting questions, so
Yes, we do.
thank you. Well, it looks like that's all the questions, so I'm going
Okay.
to wrap it up here by asking you any advice you have for up and coming creatives out there.
I would say that, wow, I've like a long list, so I won't bore you with all of them. But I would say that everything that you're going to do is a combination of your skill set and being able, so it's three things, I think. Knowing your stuff, right? Having a good bank of skills. Secondly, being able to describe what you're looking for, being able to verbalize an artistic concept to the point where people who have no idea what you're talking about can begin to understand it and visualize it. And I think that's tremendously important. And then the third thing is the ability to really understand where you sit within the process and to know that not every moment is going to be your
Hmm.
moment, and that's okay. You don't have to put 100 cues in a song. You can be Willie Williams and put four,
Right.
make them good, but you can put four in, and that's
Right.
okay, right? And that and then probably the final thing is to be humble about your work and humble about what you're bringing to the process and bringing to your audience, no matter who that is. And then hopefully, when you get to the point where you can, that you turn around and give back in whatever way that you can by mentoring someone that was once your age and looking for someone to help guide them, or to working in education or whatever. Just being available and being a good human to people that are looking for how to get through this insane business that we're
Right.
part of.
That's awesome. All right. Last question. What would you tell your younger self if you could?
Oh my gosh. I would say that this that 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 wow, Chris, that's a good one.
Sorry.
uh, buckle up. If I had to boil it
Right?
down, it would be buckle
Yeah.
up. Um, uh, but that's relevant to nothing's going to be like you're planning
Hmm.
it. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't plan it, right? To think about the next step and the next step beyond that,
Right.
to know that there are going to be changes, and to I think to do what I did instinctively, which is say yes to whatever opportunity came my
Hmm.
way. And that led my career down a couple of different pathways. When I was young in college, I was a scholarship recipient, so we had to audition for shows.
Right.
And our department was small, and I got cast. So I was on stage, which was a huge mistake for anyone to make. Um, but what that did was it gave me some empathy about what actors go through during tech week,
Right.
right? And so, and going through the process of being a TD and everything, all of those things that look like sort of offshoots that don't really have anything to do with where I ended up,
Right.
all informed my career, and I think make me have complemented and contributed to my overall skill set as an
Right.
LD. And that's what I would say is just be open and say yes,
Right.
knowing that there are going to be things that you don't know, and knowing that there are sometimes that you're just taking a leap of faith, and hopefully the parachute's going to open up.
Right. That's awesome. Well, I want to thank you all for coming, and obviously I want to thank you, Casey, so much.
You're very
You
welcome.
have been an inspiration for a lot of us, all your work that you've done, and with all your teams, obviously. And I think the work that you've done at Disney has inspired a lot of younger generation LDs who are coming up and want to do what they do because of what they see at the resort or your other shows. So I want to thank you for pouring out what you know and all your creative arts into what has inspired a lot of us. So uh, I want to echo everyone else here in the chat and say thank you so much.
Thank you
And
all. I appreciate it
for everyone
tremendously.
out there, thanks for tuning in. If you want to see more videos
Yes.
like this and streams, we're going to have a lot of other people on. Please subscribe, and we'll see you next time. See y'all.